an amazing collector, and you
Thank you.
have an educational tool. You have created the initiative called Blind Gallery with Blind Academy, where you educate and encourage artists to be active in the tech-based art world. And one section, maybe you can explain briefly Blind Gallery and then dive into one section that caught my interest, the incubator. What is it and how does it work?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me. So the Blind Gallery, the initiative started because we were seeing a lot of interest in digital art, but at the time it was a few names were driving most of the interest, right? So it was very important, the artist name. So collectors were focusing a lot on that, but there was a lot of artists that maybe weren't that known and also they were creating great art in different formats and different styles, like generative art, AI art. And we thought about making something different where instead of showing the name of the artist and promoting the artworks and the exhibitions, we were doing it purely on the art, and the artist name was hidden. So that's why we call it the Blind Gallery. And we had the inspiration on these wine tasting competitions that are blind, right? That's how you decide what's a good wine. So the experts come in, taste different wines without knowing the names of the brands. And this was very exciting, and it was very well received. So we ran a couple of shows. I think we did 5 shows across 2-3 years. And always the exciting thing was we played some guessing games. We were sharing hints. We were sharing the story behind the art and the story behind the artist, how they created their pieces, the process, and that led to the reveal day. So it was a very exciting experience, and we also found out that collectors actually enjoyed that part a lot. It's something that many of them, when we're coming to the Blind Gallery, because of that process, right? That experience and being able to discover new artists and new art across that. And the incubator, was another idea we had. Once we developed a community around the Blind Gallery, we wanted to get more input from our community on the curation aspect, right? So how at the beginning we were selecting the artists, we were reaching out to artists, but we wanted to involve the community. So what we did is we created the incubator where any artist could submit their work. It had to be work that has not been released in the past, right? So people haven't seen it in their social media or physically anywhere. And they could submit multiple pieces, multiple examples, explaining what they did, what's the process like, what tools were they making, what was the concept behind the artwork. And then our community could look at these submissions and they could vote. So depending on the amount of, so in crypto, you have these memberships and you have these tokens that give you a percentage of the voting power, right? So our biggest fans, the most loyal collectors, they had a bigger voting power than people that maybe recently joined. But at the end of the day, it was the community curating in a decentralized way without knowing the names of the artists, and the top voters, they were invited to be part of the show, of the Blind Gallery show. And again, what was fun about that is that the community didn't know which were the artists, but also they didn't know who were the artists that came in through the incubator, right? Until the end of the show, when we revealed everything, and then we said, these are the artists, and these 3 artists were part of the incubator. And then many in the community said, yeah, I kind of identified that artist because of his style or hairstyle.
With the incubator, is this something I read or I misperceived maybe? Do you teach coding? Or do you support your artists when it comes to pure technicalities?
Yeah, so we invite always, so the Blind Gallery focus on digital art that is made either with code or artificial intelligence. And parts of the incubator was to support these artists. But to be honest, the ones that go through the voting and actually win a spot in the exhibitions, they were already experienced, right? So they were very advanced. It was more on support on other aspects, right? Like in terms of marketing, in terms of pricing, in terms of sizing of their collections, and giving them feedback on these kind of intangibles that are not really on the art itself, more on the technicalities of the space, more how to market your art, how many releases. And we gave feedback in terms of the story behind the the collection, the name of the collection, the concept behind it. But all the artists were already working with digital mediums, with code, with different programming languages. And they were also, when it comes to AI, they were using the latest models. And even some of them had their own setups with their own custom-made artificial intelligence models. So they were already quite experienced.
You mentioned before the community aspect, and in NFT and Web3 space, this is so significant. And probably the creation of groups of owners of certain tokens that can communicate and interact is one of the aspects that outlines most the difference between the way digital art was promoted before NFTs and is promoted now. Can you share some of your personal thoughts on this aspect, especially regarding the concept of art? Is it part of the artwork that the community is participating? How do you perceive that on a personal level?
Yeah, I think that the community is the key ingredient when it comes to Web3 and digital art. And in a way, as you said, they shape an artist's career. Sometimes artists take feedback very closely to what they are doing. They can talk directly with collectors. They can talk directly with the community in open forums. And sometimes that influences their art. But in other times, it influences mechanisms around the art. So how is the art going to be released? What kind of digital, let's say, features can be included? And more importantly, communities keep the art alive. They keep the art relevant over time. So strong communities make sure that the art they love and the artists they love stay kind of in the digital sphere, either by curating shows, promoting it on social media, sharing it with their friends and family, creating digital galleries that can be easily shared with others, right? Their personal collections. So that's the key ingredient of a digital community. It influences the art, but it also makes sure that the art stays relevant and other communities and other people interested in art, either digitally or physically, are aware of these artists and these collections.
So if I understand you correctly, you also say that through the fact that it's easy to distribute and easy to access digital art with NFTs, you get a much wider range of perception, a much wider range of audience for this sort of art. What will the impact be on this market segment?
Once you publish digital art and it's available on the blockchain, anybody around the world can see it, right? Anybody in any country can access it, can appreciate it, can collect it. So the distribution is much faster and much wider than when it comes to physical art, right? You have to be there present to see it. Of course, then you can take photographs. But in this case, from day one, even when the artist is sharing the process, many artists share the process when they are creating their collections, that's available to the whole world, right? So what happens is you can build expectation even before a release and when the release happens. So yeah, it's a huge audience that you can reach. There are many artists from America, from Europe, from Asia now have become popular, and some of their strongest collectors are in other continents, right? So that was very hard in the past for an artist from South America or an artist from Asia to be known in another continent or in another country, and that has changed things drastically. We see many digital artists traveling all the time to exhibitions and shows in different countries because they are invited now by these people that create these amazing shows. And this is because they found them through online, through the different digital platforms that host their art through NFTs.
So practically the community has become the thumb up or down on what is good art and what needs to be collected and what will go on and what will be pushed.
Exactly. These groups of communities, so they have their own taste, and there are different communities for different kind of art. So that's also very exciting. So eventually, if you start to experience digital art, you will find a community that's kind of matches your interests, right? So some are very specific into coded art, and they go very deep down into that area, but others are more interested in AI art, which is not necessarily the artist is not necessarily developing code. So this is in terms of the techniques, right, and the tools. But there are communities that focus on I don't know, pixel art, for example, or other kinds of art that should be only displayed on the screens, right? So and not by prints, for example. So there are these very niche communities, and some of those intersect. And as you said, these are the ones that are curating and making sure the art, some artists and some artworks stay relevant over time.
There is a lot of knowledge behind it. If you want to start coding, I don't think that I could manage to simply start coding, but I could take a pencil and start drawing. Whether there is a nice output of that or not, let's leave that questionable. But Do you think that it's more difficult to enter into the digital art as an artist than it was in fine art? We're not talking purely quality, it's just getting an approach and access to it.
No, I think it's very easy these days, to be honest, to start your digital art career, if you want to call it that way. The platforms, there are many platforms, there are many marketplaces, there are many galleries. Every day, the technology, the barriers of the blockchains are being demolished. What it means is everything is getting easier to understand, everything is getting safer, everything is getting cheaper. So it's much easier even than 2-3 years ago. And you don't need to ask for permission. You can just create your digital profiles, you can work on your art, and you can just publish it, put a price on it if you want, and slowly start developing your persona, your career, your digital career. And you can target high-end digital art as well. You can create art thinking about museums, thinking about institutions, but you can also create art for this kind of new world, digital culture world. So they are both accepted, and they intersect in many ways.
That's very interesting and gives me hope of learning coding sooner or later.
Yeah, and by the way, now that you mentioned learning to code, we with the Blind Gallery, we have developed the Academy by Blind Gallery, where we team up with experts, and many cases artists, and we have a couple of courses that can help you get started, either developing code, but also understanding these concepts and this technology and how to create NFTs and how the blockchain works. So yeah, that's another thing we have developed with the Blind Gallery to support new joiners.
Great, you mentioned that. I think that's very helpful and something artists should definitely look into, no matter how good they are in their own abilities so far. I mean, you never learn enough. I just find out that prompting itself with AI is just science to itself.
Yeah, it's getting very specific. It's getting very specialized. And now there are artists and creators that are really, really good because they have experienced it and they have spent hours behind these models and these new approaches. And now they are creating very unique things that were not possible. And even if people think it's easy, there is a magic behind it, and there is a craft behind these new tools, these new technologies, and it really takes time to master them.
I'm sure it does. That's very helpful. So, I mean, your background is computer scientist. You're a computer scientist by education, and now a really important podcaster in the field and an enabler in the NFT art world. How did this happen? How does a computer scientist become an artist collector, promoter for artists?
It's a funny story. So, as you said, I'm a computer scientist. I also specialize in data science. And what happens is I was very curious about Ethereum when I learned that you could build software, that you could build applications on top of the blockchain, right? That's what interested me, and I started to investigate a little bit over 3 years ago. And eventually I was building applications on the blockchain, on Ethereum, and I came upon the NFTs, right? Digital objects. And I started to investigate, and there wasn't many information about it, right? It was hard to understand. It was hard to find interesting sources. So I created a blog. I created a blog about technology. And, I was getting readers organically because there wasn't that many information around it. And many people, and myself, when I tried to find new content, new topics, I started to see art as a very interesting area that was kind of being developed at the time. Yeah. And with my background in coding and software development, I came across generative art, which is art made with code. And that was very, very kind of an exciting moment for me because I could understand what was happening, what the artists were doing. I will go behind the artwork, look at the code. And it was very, very natural for me to understand the pieces and the different algorithms, the techniques they were using. And I was explaining this in my writing, right? So eventually I grew an audience around generative art. And then later on, I included AI art, creating my gallery. And as you said, my podcast where I interview artists, but also founders, curators, collectors in the space, and looking forward to what's next. I think the space is evolving very fast, and there are many opportunities and many things we haven't seen yet.
You mentioned before something really interesting. You said generative art, coded art. You also look into the code. How would I do that? I mean, I look at a work of generative art and I see what is depicted. or what is happening on the screen, but I cannot really look into the code, can I? And definitely I cannot understand the code. Do you think that it's important for you to decide whether you sit in front of a good piece of art or not? If that depends on the code, on the underlying code and the understanding of this underlying code, or is it sufficient for me to say, I like, I don't like?
It's a very personal question. I think everybody can make their own, decisions or questions how they want to evaluate art. It's the same with traditional painters, right? How good was their technique? How were they employing colors? How were they, what kind of materials were they using, right? So sometimes that's relevant if you are a historian and if you want to study art properly, probably that's important for you. But in general, what people say, it's what you feel when you look at a piece of art, right? So if you want to go down into the rabbit hole, you want to compare artist to another artist, you want to see the code, how well written was the code, how if you artists many times they add comments to their code while they are working on it. Some artists code in their own language, so there are artists coding in Spanish, other artists are coding in German, for example. So if you want to see like the process properly, you might want to go into the code, but this is, it's not for everybody. And it's not necessarily something you need to know or do to appreciate digital art or generative art. It's more of a personal thing. And depending on your interest, depending on your skills, you might look into the code. Some artists, they say they don't care about the style of their code. They don't want people to go into their code. It's their final artwork, what they want to see, the way how they present it. It's what's important for them. So it really depends on who you ask. And I think there is no right or wrong answer for that.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Very similar to fine art and to what we know. You made a very nice allegation to art historians who have much more knowledge looking at the piece of art. And so do you looking at the coded art, of course, does make sense, absolutely. Do you have a personal preference? Do you have something where you say, this type of digital art, it really is really breathtaking, or I consider this, you personally consider this being high level, something that you would recommend to collect?
Yeah, that's always a tough question. There are so many great artists and so many collections, especially over the past 2 years. There has been kind of a revolution where many artists, many creators have really spent a lot of time developing their algorithms, developing their code, sharing a lot of information. They can easily look at the code from other artists, from other collections. So I think the space has evolved incredibly fast. And I think one way to look at it is probably to look at the beginnings of digital art and coded art, computer art from the 50s, from the 60s. There are artists like Vera Molnar, which was one of the one of the pioneers of the computer art space. And looking at Vera Molnar's, you can then look at what's happening right now in contemporary art with the top collections from platforms like FXhash or Artblocks. And when you look at how it started in the 50s and 60s and where we are now, you can really see an evolution of what happened. And I think that's what's magical, is seeing how the space changed in 50 years, because it shows you an evolution on the techniques, but also what can be done now that was not possible in the past. So some collections that I think are worth watching because they are very unique. And again, I'm looking for things that were not possible in the past. So there are collections from German artist Kim Asendorf, which are made to be seen on screens, on high definition screens, huge screens, and he plays with pixels. He plays with pixels and creates different kinds of animations. So you can look at it at your computer, at your TV screen, but when you look at it in a show or in an exhibition in a really high definition screen, it really hits, right? So I've seen that in a couple of times. And any of the pieces from Kim Asendorf, I think it shows what's new and what can be done with digital art, and it kind of a change in the mindset of what digital art can be.
Is digital art is the main information that digital art gives, or the main input, novelty and new technicalities and going beyond boundaries? Or how would you define the main information that you get through digital art?
It's very open, to be honest. I feel like because of the nature of the space and the nature of blockchain and the nature of NFTs and the people that were around these technologies, it's very tech oriented, right? So there are many terminologies, even myself, right? I'm a computer scientist and I'm using all these terms because I understand them. So I think that makes the whole space very technical, but slowly we are making it more accessible, and it's more accessible for everybody. And I think that's when curators from other areas, not necessarily from the digital art space, come in, and where other historians come in, and they start to put their own touch right into what's happening here. And then we open everything that has happened to the world in a more accessible way. I think that's when we see really the takeaways from people, what people made out of it. So I don't think it's necessarily on the novelty. It's on what you feel, and what that you can actually see a story behind the artwork and an artist's career, that there is a subject, that there is a concept, and that they can transmit that with their work. And then their work is made with code, or their work is made with technology. But it's similar to contemporary art or traditional art, where the story, the context around it is very much important. Not only the novelty or the technology or how well written is the code. That's kind of that's the cherry on top, I would say, for these kind of artworks and this new way of art.
Okay, that's more crafts instead of what the creation and creativity brings out.
Yeah, I think because it's a new technology, people were paying a lot of attention to it, right? So and that's what drove many people into the space. This novelty, this new concept of the blockchain, of authenticating the artwork, of distributing it, of selling it online in a very pushing a couple of buttons. So there was a real novelty there. Now this is a great invention, but this now kind of people are already getting used to that, right? So what's next? And then it's more on the art, right? It's more on the artist creating something that it's interesting for people, that people want to collect. And then so the technology kind of comes in second or third degree of importance, right? Now, at least where we are right now.
Yeah, understood. To make this a bit more provocative, do you think bored apes are art? If you had to say yes, no, and maybe why?
No, I don't think so. I think I respect the Bored Apes, and I think they were important in a way to demonstrate community. It's a very strong community. But no, it will be like saying, in my opinion, that Bored Apes are collectibles, and it's like saying that sports cards are art, right? It's more collectibles. It's something you want to collect. It have a relevance in history. Some people really appreciate those items. And I think Bored Apes have a part. I mean, they are very important in a specific set of time in the history of digital collectibles, digital technology, blockchain technology. But I wouldn't say Bored Apes are art. In my opinion, those are collectibles.
Very clear answer, and I absolutely agree. Thank you very much for your time, for these insights. That was really interesting. And we're looking forward to listening to your podcast, finding out more, reading. And I'm definitely going to dive into your blind gallery. I need to learn
Thank
something.
you. Thank you so much.